Now, almost two-thirds of South Africans believe corruption is increasing in the country, and 70% are of the view that government is not doing enough to fight this scourge. These are findings of the 2019 Global Corruption Barometer for Africa. It was released by Transparency International this week. Its survey captures people's experiences and perceptions of corruption in 35 African countries. To unpack the figures in detail, I'm joined by Afrobarometer's Gugu Nonjinge. Gugu, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Am I correct in assuming that we're talking about perceptions here, not hard evidence? This is how the people who were surveyed view things, and it may not be based necessarily on hard evidence that they may have.
Definitely. The Afrobarometer is a Pan-African research network, and what we do is track citizens' perceptions on areas of governance, elections and politics in various countries, and we conducted a survey over 34 African countries. However, we were commissioned by the Transparency International to actually conduct the survey in the DRC as well. So that concludes into having 35 African countries that were surveyed for this corruption barometer, and about 47,000 interviews were conducted for the barometer.
Now, I mean, from what the people who you surveyed told you, and comparing that with perhaps other surveys that has been done, how does yours compare?
I think what is being shown by the survey or by the corruption barometer is that even though there's corruption increase in the country, or what our latest statistics is showing, citizens are actually saying that the government, yes, is doing bad when it comes to fighting corruption, but between when we conducted a 2016 survey by the Afrobarometer and the 2018 one in South Africa, even though the proportion is still relatively high, there's about 5 percentage point decline actually on the perceptions of government doing bad on fighting corruption. So in as much as it's still relatively high, citizens are seeing the change that the government is doing when it comes to corruption compared to the data that we released in 2016 and the data that we conducted in 2018.
Have you been able to sort of put your finger on that part of this survey to find out what it is that they perhaps like or they attribute the improvement to? Is it, I mean, in other words, beyond just simply saying, well, we believe this government is doing better, are there very specific things that, you know, they believe the government is doing right?
What the Afrobarometer doesn't do in its questionnaire or in its survey is they ask the questions of why. And this is normally because we want to just capture a snapshot of what's happening when it comes to citizens' perceptions on these areas, such as corruption, for example. It is up to civil society organizations, it is up to the government itself, and it's up to institutions to actually track the why and actually understand why is it that citizens actually feel this type of way when we're speaking about corruption. However, what I've found interesting is that even though citizens are ranking government badly, the one institution that they found very corrupt, or an institution that they rank badly, is the police, which is meant to protect civil societies and their communities. And that for me tells a story that we need to look into and zoom into as civil society as well.
You don't think that perhaps it's because that police are the people they encounter, whether it's on the side of the road and you have had one too many, or you were speeding, or, you know, you've done something wrong? Do you know what the reasons are?
I definitely wouldn't be able to answer that, but on my own personal opinion, majority of the citizens who've answered this question in the questionnaire have actually noted that most of them have been paying a bribe in order to access public services or civil society services in their relative communities. And that for me is again something that probably not necessarily links to police alone when it comes to paying bribes, but also to local municipalities, because they're again one of the second rated institutions or public officials that are rated as corrupt in the continent, in the country at large, by the citizens. And that for me does tell a story that corruption in its own does not as perceived by citizens, it's what interacts or what affects them in their own homesteads, in their own lives, compared to what we see play out in the larger scale of macroeconomics in the country.
Again, I mean, that's where, at local government, it is where people interface with government. Apart from those two, the police and local government, perhaps without necessarily getting into detail, what were the other areas where people felt that corruption was perhaps more rife?
I think between 2016 and 2018, when we conducted the surveys, in 2018, what we've seen, the prime ministers and the presidents and members of the parliament have all been ranking close to similar proportions, about 4 in 10, ranking them as corrupt. However, what we find interesting, the least corrupt as perceived by the citizens of South Africa is traditional leaders in their communities. And I think that's something that we could probably look into and write home about, because those who are elected into by political parties and by citizens into leadership positions are the ones that the citizens are labeling, or rather perceiving, as corrupt based on the data. And this is just their perceptions compared to traditional leaders in their community and religious leaders as well.
Okay. Well, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much, Gugu Nonjinge, who is from Afrobarometer. They did this research which found that about 70% of South Africans are of the view that government is not doing enough to fight the corruption scourge, and these people, 64%, believe that corruption is increasing.